40.4 40.4.
Welcome to 40.4, an audio-forward intermedia sonic summit hosted by B2 in the Atlas Institute at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Huge thanks to our sponsors, B2 and the Department of Critical Media Practices. Today we'll be bringing you a talk with Monica Bolles about applications of immersive audio. And Monica will be discussing the immersive audio industry and the common approaches for working with immersive audio in various practices. About Monica. So, Monica Bolles has been working with spatial audio since 2011 when she first gained access to her local planetarium's 15.1 channel surround system. Since then, she has been continuously building tool sets in Max MSP to create large textured soundscapes that explore space, movement, and interaction. She's both a technician and an artist. She works to help artists and composers translate their work to spatial environments while at the same time creating and producing her own works that have been exhibited in large-scale multi-channel speaker arrays ranging in size from 8 to 140 channels. She's currently the co-host of the Immersive Audio podcast and helps to host the spatial audio meetups organized by NOTAM. I also just want to introduce Monica as a spatial audio activist that has just been rocking the scene. Thank you, Monica. And good morning. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Sean. And thanks for inviting me to be here today. I'm definitely excited to give this presentation to all of you, and hopefully you'll get something from it. So I'm going to share my screen. And all right, is everyone seeing the presentation and not my notes? All right, cool. Awesome. So yeah, we're going to talk. I feel like we have such a short time and so much awesome information to get through. So I'm going to just dive right in. And we're going to talk about applications of immersive audio. So to start out, let's do. All right. So as Sean kind of mentioned, you all should maybe know what mono, stereo, and surround is. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of how, this evolves into working with kind of more immersive spaces, and really also just ask this question, like, what is immersive audio? What does that really mean? And I want all of you to just kind of like hold that question in your head as we move through this. And maybe at the end, if we have time, we can have a little discussion around what we now all think immersive audio is. So when we, with the way that we kind of have started with sound, we have this like speaker reproduction of sound. We started with like a mono audio format, taking one speaker, being able to kind of put all of our mix into that one speaker and present it to people. Stereo audio came around, and what this allowed is to have, you have two different speakers, and what they're doing is they're using kind of like a psychoacoustic effect to create what's called a phantom image. And so that ends up creating kind of this imaginary image in front of us for where the sound is coming from. To be able to pan sound, from like a stereo image, and to be able to create kind of stereo panning, you're using, some different algorithms that, just pretty much take the sound and pan it from your left speaker to your right speaker or back and forth. We moved to surround sound. Surround sound just adds more speakers, but it's still kind of using the same methodology around creating a phantom image that we get from stereo audio. And when you're panning sound in a surround audio kind of capability, you're just panning sound between each speaker, between the speakers that are available to you. So if you want to pan the sound, you can pan the sound from your like front left speaker to your center speaker, and then your center speaker to your front right speaker. And you're relying on, that psychoacoustic effect to create this kind of phantom image that the sound is coming from a place that there might not be a speaker. One of the limitations of that, however, is that the sound becomes there's a very small sweet spot for where, you can hear that sound and where that sound kind of lies. That means that like if you move your head just left or right a little bit, that image is going to be destroyed. And you're not going to have that same kind of image of where that sound is in space as maybe was implied by the mix engineer. So as we've kind of like moved up in history, we just started adding more and more channels. And, so when we talk about 5.1 or you have like Dolby 6.1, 7.1, nowadays kind of we've gotten to this 7.1 format. Really all that's doing is kind of standardizing speaker placement in kind of a, circle around you. But again, it's still relying on this concept of panning sound between speakers. So now we're starting to add height channels. And, you have Aura 3D is kind of a version that started adding some height channels. Dolby Atmos also adds height channels. And, we're kind of going to get into talking about, what makes something like what I would consider spatial versus just immersive, in a bit. But, this is kind of as we're moving along and kind of developing, how do we create this sense of space and where sound kind of exists in that space, we just keep adding more and more speakers. So the height element because again, it's like when you're working with this, what's called channel-based panning, panning between these speakers, you have to have a speaker in that location for that sound to actually play back. And so then we get into high density loud speaker arrays. This is an image from the Cube at Virginia Tech. They have 140 channel speaker array. You can see kind of this image here on the left it shows kind of the first row of speakers. And so they actually have 64 channels just on this kind of like ear level row. And then they kind of add speakers kind of up as you go. And so the question with these sorts of arrays is, kind of saying, okay, if you place a speaker, in this location, how does that open up your opportunities for being able to kind of place sound in space and to be able to move it, to different locations? So now we get into this concept of panning algorithms. So we have all of these different kinds of speaker arrays now that we can work with. If we want, we can just keep adding speakers. We can, have traditional like 5.1 kind of mix surround sound mixes. We can do 7.1. We could do 10.2. And then we can just add some height speakers and, be able to kind of get more and more immersivity with the sound. And now, there's a couple different approaches to how we pan sound in that space. So I've mentioned this, previously. We have channel-based panning. So channel-based panning, and this is channel versus object-based panning, but channel-based panning is really relying on kind of our traditional format of working with like stereo audio. So this is where you're using just the two stereo channels or two speakers to create these phantom images, to be able to kind of get a sense of create kind of place the sound in space somewhere that it like wouldn't normally be because you don't have a speaker there. So that's kind of how we've been handling panning for a very long time now in kind of industry standards, is this channel-based approach to panning. What's very limiting about that is that you actually have to like have these standards. You have to have a 7.1. You have to have 5.1. The speakers should be placed in certain locations. What object-based panning does is it uses algorithms that are not reliant on just having the two channels. And we're going to get into kind of talking about what some of these different algorithms are. But it actually allows you to, what I like to think of it as, or the way I like to think of it is instead of moving the sound from this speaker to that speaker, you move the sound from here to there. So it really just kind of like blows open your like understanding as kind of a creator, so that you can start thinking about like, where do I want the sound placed in space, and not what limitations you have because there isn't actually a speaker where you want the sound to be. And the other thing that it allows for is to be speaker agnostic. So now your speakers can be anywhere in the space, and you can use these algorithms to decode to different types of speaker arrays. So this is the image up at the University of Montreal, and they have, it's I think a 32 channel speaker array, and they're using a variety of different algorithms that to be able to decode to this type of array. Now, again, like when I first went into the like dome, I got my start as Sean mentioned at the Gates Planetarium, and they had a 15.1 speaker array. And when I first went in there, it's like there's no digital audio workstation plugin to be able to go to 15.1. So how do you do that? Like what do you do? And so that's where you can start applying these different 3D spatial audio algorithms that are available. There's a lot of different algorithms, and there's a lot of different companies that are creating their own proprietary algorithms for being able to handle this. We're going to kind of go over some of the more popular ones that you may or may not have heard of, just to kind of help you to understand some of what these algorithms are and what's out there, and kind of what you're able to engage with. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Ambisonics. I'm assuming some people here have heard of it. Maybe some people haven't. It's when we're taught. It used to not be when I first got involved in this in 2011. Nobody knew what Ambisonics was except like fringe people in universities that like to be nerdy and play with weird sound stuff. But Ambisonics has actually been around since the late 70s, early 80s. It was created by researcher Michael Gerson. And he wanted to, again, break away from this concept of using stereo panning to be able to create this phantom image just between two speakers. He found it limiting. And so he was saying, he kind of offered this approach of like, well, what if we use all speakers available to us to create that phantom image? So when we're getting into talking about ambisonics, it's a very complicated, complex mathematical kind of thing, and I could do a whole presentation on that. So we're not going to go deep down that rabbit hole. But the way that you kind of start thinking about it, and for anyone who is like a recording engineer, you should probably know the Blumline recording technique, which is where you use two bidirectional microphones placed perpendicular to each other to kind of capture these spherical kinds of, you have your left front, your left rear, your right front, your right rear. And it's creating kind of like the spherical sort of composition of your environment. So kind of building off of this idea, Michael Gerson and some of the researchers back in that time built what they call a sound field microphone. And the sound field microphone is using a tetrahedral approach to recording audio. And so, this is an image on the right. It says that has, these capsules that are kind of recording. So what this does is, so this is called A format Ambisonics. And so that it is referring, when you hear A format Ambisonics, it's referring to what you're getting captured by the microphone itself. This then has to be transcoded into B format or first order Ambisonics. And so what this means is in B format, you're using 4 channels, and you have your W, the omni component, and then your XYZ, which are 3 channels corresponding to the 3 figure of 8s, each one pointing towards a different direction: left, right, front, back, up, down. And so again, this is really trying to kind of capture your full kind of environment and space. And this then can be transferred into what's called higher order ambisonics. So higher order ambisonics, you just continue to add more and more of these kind of spherical components to your playback and to your encoded material. So I just want to make sure like people understand you do not need to record in Ambisonics to work with Ambisonics. Ambisonics, A format is like very specific to the like recorded Ambisonics file. However, you can virtualize all of this as well. And so you can use Ambisonics just from an algorithmic standpoint to be able to decode to a variety of different speaker arrays and being able to encode also virtual sound sources. So if you record mono, sound files or record, different, and you can place them within this kind of spherical coordinate system, and being able to just kind of move them within that space and then have it decode to your kind of your environment. So some of the considerations that you might see when you're working with Ambisonics are your order, first, second, third. So again, the higher the order really is just getting a higher resolution. You have format A and B. There's other formats, but they're rarely kind of seen. A format is, again, what's kind of the input from the microphone. B format, is referring to that kind of encoded file. The component order, you have ACN, which is just saying W comes first, then Y, X, Z. And you have FUMA, which is W, X, Y, Z. You also have normalization methods. And so one of the things you might commonly see is AmbiX. What AmbiX is an Ambisonics file format. And that's referring to B format, ACN component order, SN 3D normalization. So that's just some common things if you're working with Ambisonics that you might see, and just kind of giving you an overview of, what all of that means. So the next thing is the next kind of algorithms that you're going to see is something like VBAP, which is called vector-based amplitude panning. So this is extending on this kind of stereo-based, like channel-based, stereo channel-based panning methodology. And what it's doing is it's using like 3 speakers to triangulate the sound source. So one of the things, like if you're trying to kind of compare the difference between working with Ambisonics or VBAP, Ambisonics I find to be a lot fuzzier. Like it's harder to get kind of the very fine localization with Ambisonics. However, it really creates this very immersive experience. Like you feel like sound is coming from kind of all around you. Ambisonics can also be heavier on your CPU. So with VBAP, you can get like some better directionality. It can also decode to different speaker setups, but it has a harder time if speakers aren't evenly spaced in that speaker setup. And it can also, it uses lower CPU than Ambisonics because you're not trying to use all speakers available to be able to create the phantom image. You're only using, 3 channels at a time. So and there's other kinds of like extensions and versions of this. You have DBAP, which is distance-based amplitude panning, VBIP, which is vector-based intensity panning. And so it's just different ways of kind of, algorithmically approaching how you're working with the panning. The next one is wave field synthesis. So wave field synthesis is pretty cool technology. However, it is fairly expensive because what you're doing is you're using a bunch of speakers kind of placed around space to be able to create kind of an artificial wave front. And that this wave front, can then be very can be positioned pretty precisely. However, it's like a very expensive thing to work with because you need a lot of speakers to be able to get it to work. It's been a very popular kind of format that's been worked with at Fraunhofer, which is the institute in Germany that actually created the MP3. And so it can store and encode an MPEG-4, which is pretty cool. So there's definitely some like really cool things that people have done with wavefield synthesis, and it's, a popular format. However, it's just, again, you need the financial kind of component to be able, or an institute that has one of these systems already to be able to work with it. And so now we're also going to go to talk about like binaural audio. So binaural audio, this is kind of, so what if you don't have all these speakers and you're just wanting to, have headphones and be able to kind of create a spatial or kind of immersive experience within headphones. And this is where, there's a lot of, especially with like VR, and we're going to get in again to like more of these applications. There's this is kind of what's being used is when we talk about VR or AR or anything that's kind of going to your headphones, you're using this concept of binaural audio. So there's different ways that you can record binaural audio, which is I have, kind of this head or this this is actually just kind of like two microphones that can go in your ears and then it can record. And the reason that, you kind of have like a fake head with like ears to record, or you can actually have like a system that goes in your ears to record, is that the way that we process sound in a spatial environment, or the way that we kind of localize sound and we place it in space, has a lot to do with the shape of our head, the shape of our pinna, and even our shoulders. And it's a very personal thing. However, there's a lot of work right now to try to, really find ways to either average, kind of these binauralization algorithms. Again, you can record kind of this way, or you can use algorithms, which are called head-related transfer functions. And there's a huge amount of work going on this right now. Is like, if you go to AES, like this is all they're talking about is head-related transfer functions, and how do you like create like the best kind of like head-related transfer function to create this like image that sound is coming from, different in your headphones, that it's coming from a place in the room that's like far away and it's not like super close, or it's coming from behind you. And so there's a lot of people that are actually building like apps where you can, take a photo of your ear and you can send it to, this company, and they'll make you like a personalized HRTF. You can go into a place and like put little microphones in your ear, and they can like bounce a bunch of sounds around you. And then that'll be able to create kind of this, virtualized, kind of like this, your own like personal HRTF. And then you can use that to create these, be able to place this, kind of filtering effect on your audio that is like particular to your own like personal shape of your head and pinna, and how you like perceive like sound in space in the world. And one of the things too with like HRTFs and Ambisonics as well, is they're being used with this concept of head tracking. And so, like where you move your head and you're able to kind of, and the sound, like the sound field doesn't move, or it does move depending on kind of, like, because normally if I'm wearing headphones and I move my head and, I'm probably, my voice in the mic is moving. It's like you have, the sound kind of moves with you. But if you want the sound to just stay, you want the sound to be over here. And when you move your head, you want it to still sound like it's over here. How do you achieve that? The head related transfer functions is kind of allowing you to, again, it's creating this virtual like space. And so like when you're moving your head, that sound can stay there. Ambisonics is actually really good at that as well. And so a lot of people, use Ambisonics, because again, it's, you're using the spherical, like coordinate, like harmonic system that you have you're able to then like create this, you're able to move that around the listener. So that's something that is, popular with, again, games and just kind of headphone based content. So applications. So we're going to talk about why immersive audio. Why do you want to like work with? I mean, immersive audio is really cool. I feel like everyone should want to work with it. There's just a lot of interesting, creative possibilities. But what exactly are the actual professional opportunities working with immersive audio, and kind of where is the industry going? Where is it heading? So, one of the big ones is game production. I'm going to be honest, I'm not a huge gamer, but there's companies like ILMX Lab, which is actually a subsidiary of George Lucas kind of film productions, and it's like their interactive lab. So Skywalker Sound, is doing all of these kind of sound virtualizations. You have stuff like Star Wars Tales from the Galaxy's Edge. That's using all this kind of binaural content and spatialized content for like VR, and being able to like do kind of games and Oculuses and things like that. So there's a huge push. I mean, game audio from the get-go is kind of one of the first places that you would actually see spatialization happening within audio, because it is just very important to the gameplay of like, okay, there's, like the sound, if I have a sound behind me of a like character behind me, like that might be a cue of where I need to look, or where I need to go, or that there's something happening, in that space. So game production has been kind of a huge space that is, I think it's been doing it for a while, and it's, kind of continuing to just grow and grow within that. So there's also film production. Again, we talked, there's traditional film production in the sense of, it's kind of now the next extension of surround sound. We moved from stereo to these surround sound formats. Now we're getting Dolby Atmos or 3D are kind of the two big competitors, although Dolby's winning out because they're Dolby. Now you have like Netflix is like, oh, you can stream in spatial audio. Again, that's kind of just relating to this concept of, oh, you have the head tracking, and you can kind of move your head around, and the audio stays there. And you can ask, is that really like something that you want happening or not when you're watching a linear or like a two-dimensional film in front of you? Some people can argue that it might be somewhat gimmicky, but again, if you go to a theater, like Dolby Atmos kind of is like the big thing. There's also, a big advancement in VR film production. So this is an image here from a group called Felix and Paul. They do probably some of my favorite VR film productions. And this is a collaboration they did with Cirque du Soleil. So you can go and you can watch kind of like in virtual reality. You can kind of watch this production, and you have the audio is being spatialized. One of the studios that's doing a lot of really interesting stuff in that space is called Headspace Studio. They're based out of Montreal. They do a lot of work with, Felix and Paul, and other companies as well, and other groups. But there's some really, interesting kind of things that are happening within that space. There's also live production. So this is an image of Lord's melodrama tour. And this is, you can see kind of on the right, this is an image pulled from Lisa, the Acoustics Lisa's website. And so what they're doing a lot, Acoustic with Lisa is doing a lot of stuff, not just within live production, but they're really pushing the live production forefront. And, and they're thinking about spatial audio, not an immersive audio, not just in the sense of like, okay, sound is coming from behind you and coming from in front of you. But, again, when you're doing live audio, if you're trying to create a spatial image, traditionally, most audio engineers are going to actually mix for mono, because depending on where you're sitting in the audience, changes that spatial image so dramatically because of, the sweet spot caused by like the stereo kind of imagery. And so what Lisa's doing is like looking at like, okay, how do we expand that sweet spot? And to actually be able to get a spatial image kind of like in live production. And so they're using these kinds of like these arrays with their algorithms and kind of their technology to be able to expand on that for live production. Now they're also doing stuff where there are speakers kind of all around people as well. But this is a whole other kind of area that a lot of like major productions are kind of going down in the live sense. And now we also have music production. So the traditional music production studios, again, it's kind of that same, who knows how much I think this is going to take off within music production. Like surround sound kind of had a hard time really gaining a foothold in the music production realm. I think there's some really interesting stuff going on within, like, when you compose for spatial audio or when you compose for an immersive environment. But up mixing, there's definitely a lot of kind of fad right now to up mix to Dolby Atmos or up mix stuff that was previously recorded for stereo to Dolby Atmos. And again, it's that is that going to be gimmicky? I've talked to artists that just don't like the sound of it or the tonality, how it actually sounds is, it's not like the quality that they're looking for. But there's something I think that's really interesting when you actually do compose for space and you work with space as another composition tool in your compositions and in your productions. So there's some really interesting things that I think can happen with immersive audio within the music world. However, right now, the traditional kind of music industry is, playing around with just kind of, they're doing a lot of the up mixes. You have like Tidal and Apple Music and, these companies that are like saying, oh, now we do, spatial, which again is kind of just, it adds some head tracking capabilities. It maybe kind of creates this different, tonality. Again, is that gimmicky? Is that actually cool? I think it really depends on how you use it and if you use it well. I know, like, Pearl Jam just did a whole like Dolby Atmos kind of mixed recording. So you have some bigger artists that are starting to try to kind of get on board with that. And I think, certain artists, I think there's going to be like more, just because the style of their music, I think is going to lend more to, this space than others. And then we also have immersive environments. So this is my favorite. This is kind of where I work a lot, in the kind of immersive environment and creation space. I do a lot of stuff within like domes and planetariums. This image on the left is from up at SPAT in Montreal, stands for Society of Art and Technology. This was a performance I actually got to be there for, by IRCAM. His artist name is Fraction, called Entropia. And, and it's this concept of, again, having these full immersive visual productions as well as audio productions where the sound is, you really have control of like different things. They have like 139 channels there that are wired into a 39.4 channel system. Although I know that they're working on, they're going to be doing like a whole big remodel of the space. And I think they're going to be trying to make all of the channels individually addressable because that's been somewhat of a problem for them. But some, again, really cool stuff happening in that space. Sorry, I'm checking my time. I'm like, okay, how much time do I have? I feel like I have so much information. Yeah, and then on the right, this is a image from one of Marshmallow Laser Feast's productions. They're another really, really cool artist group that does a lot of kind of combination of like VR in like physical space. And so there's, again, this kind of concept of like these combinations of using virtual technologies and physical space and creating also, just like full on immersive environments. Again, you have like places like Meow Wolf and, they're trying to figure out how do you do more interesting spatial sound within kind of these sorts of bigger environments. And how do you, again, create these like really interesting immersive spaces and how does sound contribute to those spaces? And so then there's, it's the future of entertainment. Like, what is the future of entertainment? This is an image of kind of a rendering of this Madison Square Garden sphere that they're working on building currently in Nevada. And it's going to be like a huge music like venue. You're going to have like artists doing residencies in this space. I forget how many speakers they have, but it's a lot. And they're really trying to, push the technology, of what's possible with both the visual and the audio and kind of the immersivity of these productions. And I do think that there is a huge push right now for immersive, much more than there was when I was, back in 2011. And, there's a bunch more companies just hopping on, to get into this space. And finding that there's just like some really interesting new ways of being able to create art and to kind of express art. And what makes it interesting for people to leave their homes nowadays and go to these spaces. So I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of this in the future. So, okay, tools and plugins. How do you even get started working in this stuff? Like you want to you're like, okay, immersive audio. This seems like super cool now. Like, let's go. I'm down. um, so, again, you need to have some kind of like speaker array that you can or headphones, to start with, that you're kind of trying to do this spatial environment too. And I know you are a student at CU Boulder. They just the B2 just installed the 40.4 channel system, and that's kind of why we're here, part of why we're here talking about all this today. So I'm just going to give a shout out to Reaper as far as digital audio workstations go. There's you can use like Logic or Ableton or Pro Tools or most of the kind of traditional audio the traditional digital audio workstations to do some of this with some plugins. However, Reaper is kind of the one that most people I know that are like seriously working in spatial audio work with, which is awesome because Reaper is only $60 for just kind of like a creative license. And also has a perpetual demo license, but please provide for the developer. They've done some really great work on this. One of the things people love about Reaper is the flexibility of output routing. It's really hard in some of these other softwares to do the output routing. Like you're having to like go through all these buses, and it can be a bit more complicated. Reaper allows you to create master buses with, I think, up to 64 channel output. So like you can have, which is just crazy. And it's so easy to do. So, and you can create like multiple output buses as well, like output, like master buses, for different kinds of output configurations. So it's a great kind of software for this type of work. So we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty of what is Dolby Atmos? I'm sure, again, that's the most popular. Like a lot of people have heard about this. Dolby Atmos from there again, it's the industry giant. It's not just the kind of plugin. It's also, the system and the distribution methodology. But, when you're working at it from just kind of like a spatial kind of like spatializing, like plugin mode, Dolby Atmos, again, it's proprietary. So we have no idea exactly how they're doing their like algorithmic spatialization. So it's a very specific sound to them. What Dolby Atmos allows you to do, it supports 128 channels, which what that does is it allows you to have like a 7.1.2 audio bed, and that you can kind of mix whatever you want for your 7.1.2 audio bed. But then you have 118 audio objects that you can add to that. And so those audio objects are things that you can kind of fly around space and mix in a more object-based panning approach. So it's kind of combining both the like object-based and channel-based kind of methodologies together for being able to kind of produce, again, music or film or, whatever you're trying to produce with it. It supports 64 independent speakers. So personally, I find it limiting because I like to work with more speakers than 64. But, that's kind of, again, it's the industry standard kind of right now as far as, when it comes to, because again, it's Dolby, film production, music production worlds. When you get into the weird art worlds of beyond, most people like, yeah, Dolby Atmos, it's limiting. It's proprietary. You can't hack it. So Lisa is another like big player. And Lisa, again, we talked about them in the live production sense, and that's really where they're making some of their biggest waves. It's a system built by Acoustics. It, you know, it allows you to kind of do that, what we were talking about with the like spatial, like image, kind of just creating like a larger spatial imagery for like live production spaces. But it also allows you to like be able to create this, you know, you can still create like immersive spaces as well. Again, it's a proprietary algorithm. It's their algorithm. It's going to have their own specific sound. It's more like, but it is more flexible than Dolby Atmos, and it can decode to different kinds of like formats. So it can decode to Dolby Atmos and other surround formats. It can decode to binaural and adjust to different environments. So it's again a little bit more flexible than Dolby Atmos in that sense. And then so there's IRCAM is an institute out of France. It's a research institute, and they have been working on kind of spatial audio stuff since like the 90s. They've been like a huge player in just the kind of experimental world, and really pushing kind of the boundaries there. They, you know, and we're going to talk about Maxim SP in a bit. You know, they released what's called SPAT, which is a library for Maxim SP that was like one of the big libraries that, you know, artists were using in Max before, you know, there was any technology, you know, any plugins that any major, you know, distributors were developing. And so that it's been kind of like a huge, like huge name in that world. Now they've now come out with some like proprietary softwares in partnership with some other companies. So you have SPAT Revolution, which is a software suite, and then you have Holophonix, which is actually a hardware unit, and that's a partnership with Amadeus. And SPAT Revolution's a partnership with Flux. But they, what it allows you to do, one thing that I think is cool about SPAT Revolution and Holophonix and SPAT is like it gives you the choice of what algorithms you want to use to be able to decode to your arrays. And so I find oftentimes that, you know, not one algorithm you know, every algorithm has a different kind of weakness and a different strength. You know, and that's like, it allows you to be able to, you know, and I kind of look at it from this perspective of, it's like adding a different EQ to your channel or choosing a different microphone. It has a different sound, and you might want one sound for one thing and you might want a different sound for another thing. And so what SPAT Revolution allows you to do is you can actually create multiple buses. For like, you can have an Ambisonics bus and a VBAT bus, and a binaural bus. And then you can, you know, route all your audio, you know, or whatever audio you want to into those, you know, different buses. And then you can output them all, you know, at the same time. So that's pretty cool. It's also like, you know, really working with the live, like kind of some live components as well, and like live production too. There's Dear VR it's a plugin. You just can, you know, you can run it on, you know, an audio channel in your DAW, and it allows you to be able to, it's heavily used within the VR production world, for being able to just kind of spatialize your sound. It has some like good ways of being able to kind of connect to the visual component of your VR elements that you're working with. They have like they actually have like a suite that allows you to be able to use your control, like your what do you, the handset controller things, I'm blanking on that word, to be able to move your sound around in space with the like in virtual reality. So there's, you know, that could be interesting for some people. So there's a bunch of different Ambisonics plugins, if you want to like, you know, just work in your DAW and like decode to Ambisonics. The ones I have featured here are the IEM plugin suite and Sparta. Both of these are free, and honestly are like IEM, from like, you know, like everyone I've talked to and, you know, myself playing with it, is kind of like the, you know, considered one of the best kind of Ambisonics plugins that's out there. And it's free. So, you know, like Waves has an Ambisonics plugin. But again, like they're kind of, you know, it costs money, and honestly, IEM is like just as good, if not better. So, and there's like some more flexibility with some of the tool sets. So these are, again, some really great free tool sets if you just want to like start playing with Ambisonics and getting an idea of it. You know, go to their sites and download. They're both like different research institutes that have developed these over time. So then there's MaxMSP. So some people might know what MaxMSP is, some people might not, but MaxMSP is a really awesome platform. Like I've used it extensively in my work. Again, it's kind of like a graphical programming environment. And there's a lot of artists that use it. There's a learning curve to being able to use it for sure, but it gives you so much flexibility because you can pretty much just say like, oh, I want to do this weird thing that nobody's ever thought of before, and I can just build it, and I don't have to like rely on someone to build it for me, and just or wait till like the software comes out that can do this thing that I've been wanting it to do. So it actually allows you a lot of like flexibility to play with it. And so like a lot of people working in spatial audio that have been working in it for like a long time, really have been using our like MaxMSP artists that, or Super Collider's the other one, which is a more of a line-based programming environment. But the libraries, the most popular libraries within MaxMSP are SPAT, HOA, and ICST. And so these like are different libraries that you can download. So if you are a Max user and you want to start playing around with some of this, those are the libraries to go look for. And SPAT again is created by IRCAM. ICST is, I'm blanking on the name, and HOA is kind of a newer one. I've heard some people like not super like saying the math's a little bit weird with HOA, but those are some great places to go. And then there's also Max for Live. So if you're an Ableton user, you might be used to like, you might have like seen, you might be familiar with Max for Live kind of objects. You might not have ever used MaxMSP, but about like, Max for Live. So the two kind of like big tool sets right now are there's Envelop, which it's Ambisonics based. And those ones are all free. That's based out of, they're like out of San Francisco. And you can download these tools that they have. They've just created some like, basic plugins that you can drop onto your live tracks and be able to play around. XPA4L was developed by Eric Renaud, and he just kind of released it recently. He's using all SPAT tool sets and the SPAT library in the background. So there's a little bit more flexibility as far as like what algorithms you're using to be able to decode. He also kind of has like this giant like list of spatial audio installations around the world that you can choose from to decode to. So a lot of the spaces that like the weird kind of like spaces in academic institutions that have these crazy environments to be able to play with, like they're all he kind of has a list of those. Sound Particles is awesome. These guys it's a standalone application. It allows you to be able to create like these like particle. It's taking like particle like graphics methodologies and applying it to audio. So it's like what people might use for creating like giant explosions and CG graphics. He's using that same kind of methodology for for working with sound particle, for working with sound. And so you can have like little particle sounds and you can control how they move in space. So this is it doesn't run in real time. You have to render these. It's really good for like sound design, but it's a cool platform. There's also Project Acoustics, and Project Acoustics was by Microsoft. They're doing like actual architectural rendering of spaces, and then using you do all of this like really crazy architectural rendering of the space like offline, and then you're able to kind of drag in and so this is really great for games, and then you're able to drag in kind of like just a like I think it's like an XML file or something, and that has kind of reference to how the space is, and so it's just lowering the CPU usage for being able to do real-time kind of like reflection rendering, like complex reflection rendering of a space. They're like not super, I feel like they're not like a super well-known thing. We just had a really great conversation with them for Immersive Audio podcasts, and they do some cool stuff. And then there's more. So there's SPAT Greece, which is for spatial. I know I see Wayne here. Hi, Wayne. and Spatial is they're doing some really great stuff. They're out of the Bay Area initially, but they're like building kind of I'd say it's like more of an interactive platform for being able to work with audio and they're kind of focusing right now, it seems, on like, some of the like more kind of installation space. But Wayne's been kind enough to let me play with their software, and I'm getting pretty turned on to it, so it's cool. And there's Mountain MNTN. So these are just some other stuff you can look at. So, okay, where am I at time? Okay, I'm gonna I want to leave like 10 minutes, I guess, for Q&A. So I'm going to try to move through the rest of this quickly. So recording, so how do you record for, spatial audio or immersive audio? There's some microphones you might have seen out there. You have here like this Eigen microphone to the left, which is the weird kind of blue, gray, black microphones. You have the Zilia microphone up at the top. This core sound microphone, and this is I think that's the Rhodes. Oh, I forget which one I pulled in. But the so the Eigen mic and the Zilia microphone are supposedly able to do third order Ambisonics recordings with some fancy kind of mathematics behind it. You have the core sound microphone, which is doing a second order Ambisonics recording using kind of 8 capsules. You have there's the Sennheiser and the Rhodes, like microphones that are Ambisonics kind of based microphones that are recording first order Ambisonics, kind of the traditional first order. And so this is one approach people use it a lot, like in like VR film production and stuff, when you need to have kind of a limited space. However, there's a lot of conversation in the community just about the tonality of the microphones. And if the tonality is I would say I've had some conversations where I feel like the consensus is that like most people aren't like stoked on the tonality and kind of how the tones turn out. So, some of the other, ways that you can, record are actually just recording for space. So you place a microphone where your speaker is going to be, or you like have just a ton of microphones and you're, kind of like creating these like really immersive recordings. So yes, I forget how many microphones on one violin player, but a lot. And this recording on the right, we were doing for 9.1 or 3D kind of configuration. And so you're actually just like kind of trying to place a lot of the microphones where you're going to, like in kind of where the speakers are located. And then you have some spot microphones and that you can kind of mix in different ways. But, that's one way of kind of creating that sense of recording space, is just placing microphones where you want your speakers to be. And then you also have kind of this concept of virtualizing microphones, which is one of my favorite, and exploring, it's just taking microphones. You can, again, use multiple microphones and placing them in the environment, but then you just virtualize them into your kind of decoding space. So it's, and you can do some like playing around. So this image on the left, I'd recorded the piano. This is at the old black box before it got flooded. And I had like just 4 microphones kind of around it. I also had this bicycle seat kind of DPA microphone like in the middle of it. And, and then one of like the things I would do is actually like kind of place the microphones like where they were like in the space, but then rotate, some of the microphones while keeping some of the other microphones stable. And you're kind of creating this like interesting wah, wah, wah sound. And so you can actually play with, how you have microphones set up in space and how you're moving them in the kind of virtualized space to create different tonalities. So I'm really fascinated with, how do you use microphone techniques to create new tonalities in immersive kind of in spatial environments. And so starting to think, again, if you're doing tracking, thinking kind of like, how can you track things in an interesting way? And how can you then virtualize that and play with some of those virtualizations to create different sounds? And so then there's distributions and standards. This is all still very much amorphous, but you have, this is like, okay, how do I get my content out there? How do I actually like make a thing, like put it into a thing and then distribute it to people? That has been a very hard challenge for me and most of the things I do in my life up to this point. And, and I still don't know if the full answers are there, but, Dolby Atmos is, it is a distribution and a standard, it's a whole kind of system. And so that's, again, one of the popular ones. So when you have like Apple Music, they're using Dolby Atmos, to do their distribution. You have like Netflix, they're using Dolby Atmos. There's also DTSX is another one that is out there. And there's the Fraunhofer MPEG-H that is kind of coming on the scene. And so this is like, how do you, again, like encode, all your metadata, and then like somebody on their system can kind of take this file that you sent them and, play it back, without having to, do a lot of crazy configuration. So, all right. So there's composers. I'm not going to go super in depth other than I'll just kind of mention their names, and I have some links I'll share that, you can go and listen to their stuff, because I feel like we're getting close to time. I just wanted to feature a few people I've met throughout my time in the space. This is Kristen Norderval. She does some really interesting stuff with like, and again, like this idea of like, how do you think about like composing for space? How do you like break out of, just this traditional kind of stereo composition methodology where you're thinking of, time and frequency, but now how do you also think about space as you're adding it to your compositions? I really like this image of her because she has all these pianos that are all around. And, it's like, how does that actually change the listener experience? How does it change depending on where you are within the space? How do how does the interactivity component of it even change, how you're interpreting, what's going on? Leah Reed, she does some really, I met her at the Cube at Virginia Tech, and she has a lot of her composition is using kind of like acousmatic approaches, which is using kind of acoustic instruments that she's recorded and then finding ways to manipulate them like in different ways. And so she's done a lot of stuff with kind of like this more kind of traditional element of like diffusion work within spatial environments, and then also, finding other ways of like diffusing the sound in space. But a lot of her stuff is very spatial and kind of explores, how sound can be used in a compositional way in space. There's Miriam. I am not going to try to pronounce her last name because it's really hard. But she is awesome. She helps me co-host the Immersive Audio podcast, or co-host the NODAM Spatial Audio meetups. And she has been doing a lot of really, really amazing work with just creating these really beautiful compositions, again, using space and finding some interesting ways to do that. And I'll provide some links that you can go check out some of their work. And so resources, again, as was mentioned, I help co-host the Immersive Audio podcast. I kind of just came on back in July, but we interview people within the immersive audio industry and just have awesome conversations with them. I've been really having fun with it. Some of my favorites, actually probably the next two that have not been released yet are going to be really cool. So one was with Project Acoustics and the other one we still have to record, so I'm not going to announce it. But, if you're interested in game audio, those two will be really good. I also really enjoyed our conversation with Hyungkook Lee, which is mostly more of a conversation around what is immersive? What does it mean? Like, how are we defining it? And then I'd also say we talked to for the SPAT revolution, like Hector Laren. Well, I hope I didn't mess up his first name. But that was another like favorite conversation of mine. So if you want to check out some of those, and there's many more conversations that you can have there. I also help co-host the NOTAM Spatial Audio meetups. The next one will be March 9th at 11 a.m. MST. And it's like 7 p.m. Oslo time. But it's free. It's open for anyone who wants to come. And we just hang out and we talk about spatial audio. And there's some really amazing people from the community that show up. Sometimes we have some presentations. I think my co-host from the Immersive Audio podcast is going to do a little presentation at this upcoming one. So next Wednesday, if you would like to join, please come. The other resource that I recommend is the Spatial Audio and VR AR MR Facebook group. It was put together by Jean Pascal from Headspace Studio, and there's really, really just like great resource of people in there. So if you're interested in getting into it, that's a good space to go. So, okay, Q&A. We have a little bit of time.
Yes, Monica, thank you so much. I love this picture. That pretty much sums you up right there. So fabulous. I wanted to just have a couple comments before we go into questions. I was getting a lot of questions as direct messages. But one comment is that in addition to the game production, film production, live production, and music production, I feel like an important space to mention in this context is immersive audio and immersive technologies in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
I've been working with a company in Boulder called Reality Garage, and we're working on a contract for the Children's Hospital that's really, really audio forward. And it's an interesting study. I feel like in some ways we're kind of carving space for future folks in the immersive space to work in hospital and care settings. It's a really intense project, but I just wanted to add that piece of it, that the healthcare sector is really a big application of immersive audio as well, potentially. Also, the comment that immersive audio is awesome and that everyone should want to work with it. It just made me so happy, and it's really kind of the piece that's galvanizing all of this, right? This event is through 40.4, which is this audio forward immersive intermedia festival that we're starting. And I'm really hoping that it gets people excited about immersive audio, and we're going to be bringing more and more guests. On that front, just again, thanks to Undine Geary at B2, Terry Reeb at Critical Media Practices, and everyone who attended today. I'm really looking forward to seeing and hearing everyone at some 40.4 events in the future. We're hoping to have Eric Reynaud, as you mentioned, from that project in the SAT up in Montreal, do kind of a workshop artist talk at some point in the future. So stay tuned for that. From Rachel Ascari, I think you're still here, Rachel, if you want to follow up, but she asked, as an established audio engineer focusing on immersive audio, what advice would you give to aspiring audio engineers? Maybe who were your inspirations when you first began your career in education?
Yeah, I guess. So I think my inspiration kind of was the technology itself, and just like being excited by the spatial audio. And I think I found inspiration, through just events that I've, like I go to conferences, or I go to, or I end up presenting at these different events. So like I've mentioned the Cube. So I went to like Cube Fest multiple times and presented. I've also been up at like the SAT in Montreal. Like I'm very inspired by all the work they do. And it's, kind of going to some of these physical spaces where there's these really amazing communities around them, with people that are just as excited about this stuff as me, and then starting to realize like, oh, I didn't even know who you were, but you're my hero. And oh my God, like you've done all this amazing stuff, and like definitely feeling some imposter syndrome. And then, but being like, oh, but you want to be my friend. Okay, that's cool. And, I think it's just like, I think being inspired and being passionate about like, why are you using it? Like, if you're not inspired and passionate about it, like, maybe you shouldn't do it. But if you are inspired and passionate, like just be inspired and passionate about the possibilities. And then, finding like the different people that share that passion, and just, diving in with them.
question from Eden Sage. This is kind of a good launch point. We might want to talk about social media and the metaverse. The metaverse. But Eden Sage asks, what ideas do you have to further revolutionize immersive audio with the way immersive technologies are headed?
So personally, I've mostly been interested in kind of my main fascination and passion has been within the live space, and so I've been really interested in like how do you create kind of these, how do you get different people, how do you get people to move in a space by just the sounds that you use, without telling them, hey, move from point A to point B. Can you actually like use sound to kind of get people to move and interact with the space in a different way? And I think that, there's, and then also just like, how do I, as an individual and as a performer or as an artist or as working with artists, interact with space? And how do I kind of, expand on that? And, I think, so for me, like a lot of my personal kind of like interests are with that live interaction component. So that's personally what I'm really interested in and excited about. I know there's, the spatial, there's, again, as you mentioned, like the, the metaverse and, how does that kind of play in? And I think a lot of that really is kind of around the like game production component, and creating like virtual environments, and that's really just like trying to create, these different sonic environments within a modeled reality. And what does that look like? And how do you kind of, how can you also not just change the visual reality, but also the sonic reality in a way that's doesn't make people sick? I think that's a big thing.
So maybe to kind of move this into more of a conversation, it might be great to hear from Enrique and or Wayne. So Enrique is over in Vienna, working with a concept of hybrid audio diffusion systems, and it really ties into this live applications of immersive audio. Enrique, do you want to chat about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. Well, also I would like to maybe I can talk a little bit about that, but also to ask Monica in the sense because it has to do in what I am doing also about the composition to these systems, right? How to use space as a main parameter to compose music, and how does that change the mindset, right? And so for me, that's been a quite interesting process in this research. And to ask you, how do you think of space and how it's related to the, let's say, if you call it like a piece, a work, how is at the end reflected there? I don't know if it was clear, my question, but I hope.
So I actually have a whole other presentation that I've built and I'm working on about this concept of creating space and what does it mean to create space. And, and talking about it kind of from a sound and visual and environmental component, but also just kind of like a personal component and how you relate to other people. But yeah, I think like, space, I think it can be defined in so many different ways, right? And it's not just, about like your physical space, but it can also be about like your emotional space, or it can be about, like relational space. And so I guess I like to look at space from all those different lenses and try to incorporate, all of those different ways of looking at space within what I'm doing. Also, like, I did, a piece using, like data, using data, that I sonified from like actual space of like Venus and Earth as they move around the sun, and kind of like thinking about scale, like as well. So I think that there's, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it. And I think that just starting to ask yourself, I guess, how do you work with space, or like, what is space to you? What does that mean? What are the ways you define it? What are the different ways you define it? Now, how can that translate into creating either a sonic environment, or even like your own personal relationship within that, like with that sonic space, or how can you get people to interact with that sonic space in a different way? So I wanted to share this this resource link that I've put together. It has all of the resources from like of all these, like all the tools that I talked about, and more, and links to them, so you can go and check that stuff out. There's also a file in there with just links to a bunch of stuff that covers the history, some more technical stuff, and just also the composers that I mentioned, so you can kind of go check out some of their work. So there's some really like great resources in there, and I encourage anybody and everybody to check it out.
40.4 40.4 40.4 40.4 40.4 40.4 40.4